20 years ago, I deer hunted southeast of Fort Worth, Texas, outside the town of Palestine. We hunted on over 10,000 acres of woodland forest leased by Texas Parks and Wildlife. On one of my hunting trips with my friends, we ate and geared up for a day of bow hunting. It was 4:30 a.m., and I was going to put up my tree climbing stand. Along the trail were old-growth oaks and pine trees and thickets. Halfway to my hunting location in the thicket next to me, I heard a loud noise, and it sounded like someone or something heavy lifting itself off the ground. The only light I had was one I had strapped on my head. I turned to the left and looked into the thicket, but it was too dense to see through. And at first, I thought it was a wild hog because a couple of mornings earlier, I ran into a bunch of those. I sidestepped 3 or 4 steps to my right. With heavier footsteps, the creature did the same and made a snorting noise in my direction. I'm 6'3" tall and I weigh 212 pounds. Whatever made that noise was bigger than me. Every hair on my body stood up. My compound bow and 5 arrows were the only weapons I had. I pulled one of my arrows from the quiver, brought the arrow to the string, and had the bow in a firing position. If I had to, I was going to fight to the death. I sidestepped again to my left 3 or 4 steps, and the creature did the same. I looked into the thicket in front of me, and I told whatever was there that if it did not hurt me, I wouldn't hurt it. And I slowly turned to my right in the direction of the trail, and I started walking away. I looked over my shoulder, and I saw nothing behind me, and I did not hear any footsteps. I finally made it to my tree, and I climbed up to the stand, and I hunted the rest of the day without any other events. After that incident, I only went hunting when I had some daylight. And the next year, Texas Parks and Wildlife gave up the hunting lease. We heard that it was too expensive and was turned into a private hunting club. I had never heard of Bigfoot until last year when I came across your channel. It makes me wonder, what if this had been a Bigfoot? I really enjoy your channel more than any other. Thank you very much. The way your voice, he goes on saying nice things about me. I appreciate that. His name is Jim. Jim, I appreciate it. Jim heard something in the woods. No way it was a pig. No way it was any other kind of animal because it was just too dang big. And it was snorting, matching his steps, and I bet he did have a Bigfoot encounter. Thanks for the story, Jim. Okay, short intro. Welcome to the podcast. My name's Cam Buckner. This is the Dixiecryptid podcast. You can also find the podcast out on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast by doing a search for What If It's True podcast. In this podcast, I've got one Dogman story, one Bigfoot story, and a real treat at the end. So you're going to have to wait for that. But the last 20 minutes or so of this podcast are fantastic. You'll just have to get there to see what it is. All right, here we go. All right, we got a Dogman story. The writer titles the story Juvenile Delinquent Dogman. He claims it's true. He wants to be anonymous. Long ago, my parents owned a well-maintained single-wide trailer that included all the amenities already connected. The property was an hour and a half away from our home and was located at 3,000 feet. The area was good for hiking, hunting, and getting away from city life. 2 Basque shepherds worked at a nearby ranch and pastured their flocks of sheep near the dirt path leading to our property. And on weekends, gliders rode the mountain thermals, and sometimes the sky was filled with colorful hot air balloons. It was a beautiful little bubble with little interference from the outside world. The local neighbors added no end of color. A retired railroad worker, I'm having trouble saying that. A retired railroad worker on a wager had dragged 2 Pullman cars up that narrow mountain dirt road, and his dwelling looked like a railroad station with cars on tracks beside the station. One of the local firemen had designed his house to look like a fire station, and two older women lived in a small two-story Victorian-style house perfectly painted blue with white trim. The residents on the main road had wired phone service and were replete with off-grid power sources of various designs long before off-grid power became popular. There was plenty of space separating the neighbors, so the evenings were quiet with the occasional friendly visit from the sheriff, whom I got to know well. One late autumn weekend with perfect weather, my wife and I, still a young married couple with a highly energetic toddler daughter, decided to go to the mountains before the snow set in or the rain made the dirt roads undrivable. We arrived prepared for a relaxing short weekend, and we spent much of the first day enjoying ourselves and keeping a close eye on our daughter. At sundown, the mountain temperature dropped quickly, and we went inside for dinner. After our daughter finally went to sleep, my wife and I watched the full moon rise through the windows. At this elevation, it looked huge, and as expected, we heard the coyotes soon start singing. It quickly escalated into chaos and then went abruptly quiet. All the clamor got me thinking that I'd be more comfortable if I were armed, but I only had birdshot in my shotgun. I headed out to the van to grab some double-aught buckshot, and when I reached the bottom of the stairs, the moonlight showed me half a dozen coyotes staring at me from 20 feet away. I backed up against the trailer to keep them from encircling me while thinking about how to use 4 shots I had left. We stared at each other for what seemed like forever, until the strangest thing happened. The alpha sank to his belly and started a doggy crawl toward me. The other 5 pack members followed in turn. And when the alpha reached me, he rolled onto his back demanding a tummy rub. One after another, they all did the same. I wondered if these were somebody's exotic pets or just full moon crazy. I kept my distance, though, and the coyotes crawled away, and they got up and disappeared into the woodline. I ran to the van and grabbed my bandolero and slug barrel, and I sprinted back to the trailer. I swapped out the barrels and loaded the magazine in record time. My wife, who had watched the dog's strange behavior from inside the trailer, hugged me. "That was the craziest thing I've ever seen," she said. And I shrugged, trying to project a false sense of calm. "They had to have been somebody's pets," I said. After calming down, the quiet night air was suddenly riven with ear-splitting howls and growls that shook the trailer like an earthquake. It wasn't from the coyotes, though. The howls were far louder and deeper than any animal I'd ever heard. The vocals were followed immediately by 2 shotgun blasts, the crack of 2 rifle shots, and then total silence. Within a half an hour, blue lights were flashing at the bottom of the road, with radio traffic breaking the silence. It was all too much for us, and we decided to head home early. My wife and I grabbed our sleeping daughter and got in our vehicle and cautiously navigated the road, cut into the side of the mountain, and finally reached the main road. 2 squad cars lit up the intersection, and both of the shepherds were on the scene. One of them spoke excitedly in Basque, while the other one translated. It seems the Basque-speaking shepherd was returning from a pizza run, and upon return, he saw 2 wolves heading for the sheep. He yelled at them, and one of the wolves lunged at him in his truck. There were scratches on the driver's side door to prove it. The wolf tried to eat the double barrel and lost the back of its head to 2 shotgun blasts. The translating shepherd had opened fire on the other wolf with his .30-30. He claimed he hit the other wolf twice, but it still carried off a small sheep. Feeling braver with extra people, I got out of the van, and I was still clutching my shotgun. The sheriff, who had become a friend of mine, nodded for me to follow him. He lifted a plastic tarp and he showed me the shepherd's double barrel inserted into the longest canine snout I had ever seen. After a moment, he motioned toward the front paw. I was speechless. It looked more like a hand with claws than a paw of a wolf. I have no doubt those claws left their mark on the truck door, and I never thought that wolves ran in this area, much less got that big. The sheriff dropped the tarp over the animal and wished us a safe journey home. And I got back in the van and looked at my wife and I said, wolves were after the sheep. A week later, I received a letter with no return address. Inside was a local mountain newspaper clipping, and it stated that there had been a wounded bear causing problems in the area. The county had hired 3 professional hunters who tracked the bear for 3 days before ending its reign of terror, and the carcass was immediately disposed of. A handwritten note at the bottom stated that the boss had removed the sheep from the pasture and would no longer go near the ranch. That following spring, my brother and his fiancée wanted to go with my wife and me up to the mountains for a day trip to see the snow. I agreed under the hard boundary of leaving well before sundown and that we both would be heavily armed. While our daughter spent the day with Grandma, the 4 of us arrived at the single-wide. The remaining snow was still plentiful and untouched, and as soon as we were out of the vehicle, I noticed some movement at the tree line. 2 female coyotes wandered out and found a bare sunny spot to lie down. One of them looked over at us and gave us a low bark, and 10 attention-seeking puppies quickly attacked us. The wives were elated, and one of the coyote mothers looked at me as if to say, "They're your problem now. I'm taking a nap." 20 minutes later, she barked again, and all the puppies ran back to their mothers and disappeared into the tree line. It was yet another bizarre experience I added to my mental list of things that had happened there. It was a beautiful and strange property tucked away from the world, with a population of eccentric neighbors, both human and canine. That summer, a fire destroyed the trailer and the 200 acres. The cause was listed as arson, and no suspects were found. For the next 7 years, the entire ranch erupted into fierce wildfires every summer. We only went back once to view the damage. My mother finally sold the ravaged land to a land consolidator for a pittance. I often think back to that night that those wolves attacked the shepherds. After listening to your channel, I believe 2 juvenile dogmen had come out to try their hunting skills and paid dearly for their inexperience. Oh man, that was a cool story. He actually saw a dead, I guess it was a dogman. Some guy stuck his shotgun, one of the shepherds stuck his shotgun right in the snout and killed the dogman, and they had it laying there under a tarp. Then, I don't know, then they give this fake story about a bear being there and the shepherds leaving. I don't know, man. You got to wonder how these things happen. It's really kind of interesting. It's a really good story. It's a real intriguing and creepy story, but I loved it. I sure appreciate the writer for sending it. Okay, this last story is going to be the first chapter from a novel. Well, let me tell you how I came across this. This guy sent an email to me. It was about a year ago. And y'all, I have over 2,000 emails in my inbox, and I don't always open emails the minute I get them. And sometimes I'll go for 2 weeks and not even look at my email account. And then when I go looking for stories to put in the podcast, I just kind of roam around my inbox. It's like, you just couldn't believe how full it is. But I came across this one today, and the author's name is Chris Kitchens. Chris was in the Marine Corps, and when he got out, he says he's on the road a lot, but he wrote a book, and he's interested in cryptids and Bigfoot and other things, other paranormal things. And he wrote a book called Elusive. I'm going to read you the first chapter of it because it's really good. You guys that like to read these type of stories, I think you'd love this book. Again, it's called Elusive. The author's name is Chris Kitchens. The link to the book on Amazon will be in the description. And I hope you buy it and support him and read it because and this first chapter would keep me hooked and make me want to read the whole book. So let's read the first chapter. I think you're going to like it. After retiring from the Marine Corps, Josh landed the job of a lifetime with the Arkansas Department of Natural Resources as a nuisance animal control officer. While the job was not a full-time position, it did come with several perks, the main one being that he had time to work on their ranch in Cove, Arkansas. Josh met his wife Emily while on his third deployment to Afghanistan. Recently promoted to lieutenant colonel and nearing her 20-year mark, she was able to get a billet at the Little Rock Air Force Base to finish her career, which worked out great for their plans. Although Josh truthfully believed Emily about the Sasquatch encounter that she had while growing up outside of Bayview, Idaho, he often teased her over the Sasquatch movies and shows that she made him watch and the podcast that she liked to listen to about the subject. While Josh thought Bigfoot was a possibility, he never dreamt that he would come face to face with one in his lifetime. After all, the only actual proof that existed was the video from Northern California shot back in 1967. Josh was dispatched to Wayton, Arkansas, where ranchers were reporting livestock attacks from an unknown predator, and their efforts to thwart the attacks, along with identifying and terminating the predator, were going nowhere. Little evidence was left after each attack, and with the ground being rocky and hard, track impressions were all but impossible to find. The animal had hit several chicken houses in the area, leaving only feathers and the heads of the chickens. Although cattle were present, none of them had been attacked at this point. Occasionally, some feed went missing, and if dogs were around, they were either scared of this predator or it was stealthy enough to avoid the dogs. This led Josh to believe that a large cat was in the area, so he opted for his integrally suppressed 300 AAC blackout with low variable powered optic with 4 magazines of his hand-loaded 180 grain soft point ammo, along with his Nighthawk Custom 1911 and 460 Roland as a secondary firearm. As per his personal standard operating procedures, his custom-made 4.5-inch fixed-blade field knife was a staple on the back of his battle belt he wore while in the field. After meeting with the rancher from the most recent attack and going over the area, Josh parked his truck where the rancher said it would be out of their way, and he proceeded to gear up for the hunt. Carrying enough water and food for a week in his pack, Josh headed toward the nearest tree line with the confidence his tracking skills would lead him not only to the animal that he was looking for, but also identify what he was looking for well before he encountered it. Large cats are very stealthy, blending in extremely well in their environment and having an uncanny ability to stalk their prey while being stalked themselves. And while cougars and panthers and mountain lions, or whatever the locals referred to them as, were not common in Arkansas, the Game and Fish had recently recognized them as being in the state. Josh had seen a few back in his youth and, like many others, knew they had been here for years. The ranch bordered the Ozark National Forest, and though it was still spring, much of Arkansas had experienced a mild winter, which meant many trees bloomed early. The forest in the area consisted primarily of hardwoods, and being in the mountains, the underbrush wasn't as thick as in the lower areas by the streams and rivers, or the delta region of eastern Arkansas. Josh scoured the ground for any sign of the animal as he began to search. Checking his position on the GPS, Josh knew he had a couple of hours before sunset. He wanted to make camp prior to nightfall and began scouting for a defensive spot to make camp. Light discipline was crucial with the probability of a cougar in the area. He would be relying on his thermal imager and night vision clip to see what he may not be able to see with his naked eyes. Josh had found a small pocket against a rock outcropping that would be perfect. There was only one way in should whatever may be lurking in the night decide to attack. He set about running some fishing lines with bells attached around the perimeter to act as an early warning system, and after ranging several reference points, he started making his supper. He still had cell service, so he checked in with Emily to let her know that he was okay, and he sent her the coordinates of his location. And as Josh relaxed by the small fire he'd built, he was checking his GPS information. He was a little shy of 2 miles away from where he'd crossed the fence, yet had covered 6 miles as he worked the area looking for tracks or clues. He finally picked up the trail he was currently on after finding some feathers and chicken parts. While this wasn't much to go on, he felt confident he was on the right track. As the sun settled behind the mountains, he snuffed out his fire. He did not need the flames to interfere with his night vision. Closing his eyes, Josh let the darkness of the woods envelop him. This was when he felt like he was most alive, in the forest and away from all the noise. Even small towns emit a lot of noise pollution. And focusing his hearing, the forest was coming alive with the night critters that inhabited it. A lone coyote yelped in the distance as the crickets chirped their serenade. With the exception of whatever was killing the chickens and making the larger livestock animals nervous, all was well. After scoping the area with the thermal for a few hours, Josh settled in to get some sleep. And he was startled awake by how quiet the forest had become. He checked his watch and it was 4:25 in the morning. Josh strained his ears, listening for the slightest sound. It was as if a switch had been flipped or putting on sound suppression earmuffs. There wasn't any noise at all. Moving as slow and quietly as he could, Josh powered the thermal on and began scanning the area. He saw nothing. He eased around to a sitting position with his back leaning against the rocks he had set up in. He placed his rifle where he could shoulder it quickly, and he waited. It would be another hour before the sun would begin rising and the moonlight was waning. Josh was reaching for his water when he heard it, a feminine voice that said, "Help me." The voice sounded strange, almost mechanical. He sat there in silence, listening intently. He couldn't have heard a voice as there wasn't any direction from which it came. That's it, Josh thought to himself. I've officially gone off my rocker. He had no longer finished that thought when he heard the voice again. "Please hurry," was what sounded in his head. The voice was followed by what sounded like a loud thump against a tree. Slinging his pack over his shoulders, he now had a direction to go toward. Walking cautiously with his rifle at the low ready, Josh made his way toward where he believed the noise had come from. "Don't be alarmed when you crest the knoll. He will not hurt you," another voice said. This was a different voice. Again, it was mechanical in nature, but it was just different. Trying to control his breathing, Josh was experiencing a severe adrenaline dump to his system. His senses seemed to be in hyperdrive, and the air seemed to be bristling with electricity. The knoll was now less than 100 meters away, and he was closing quickly. Scanning the woods for any sign of movement and sweeping his weapon to check behind him every fifth step, Josh was moving quickly as a sense of urgency seemed to overcome him. Nothing could have prepared him for what he was about to see as he topped the knoll. Josh almost lost his balance as he came to a sudden stop, lunging backward to help offset his forward momentum at what was laying there before him. It was a very pregnant female Sasquatch. Her hair was auburn in color, and what skin was exposed around her face, hands, and breasts and feet was leathery tan-colored. Her hazel-colored eyes were large and soft, and as he looked in them, he could see pain, fear, and intelligence. "Something is wrong," she said. Lowering his weapon, Josh wondered, "How's this possible?" He said it out loud. "Please help quickly," was her reply. Josh knew she hadn't said the words verbally, yet the words were crystal clear in his head. And he set his weapon down, dropped his pack, and began digging his medical kit out. Scanning the area, he noticed another one peeking out from behind a tree. Now this one was larger, and Josh figured that one to be a male. "I won't hurt you," the voice tried to reassure him. "Please help her," the voice pleaded. He put on a pair of nitrile gloves, and with his med kit in hand, Josh stated sympathetically as he could, "I'm going to do all I can to help. Let's see what's going on." Kneeling down, he began his examination. The anatomy, though somewhat disproportionate, appeared to be roughly the same as a human. Now, Josh had never delivered a baby human before, yet he had helped many mama cows and a few horses deliver their babies. Hopefully those experiences would help him here. Putting his headlamp on, Josh apologized to her, saying he was sorry for having to put his hand inside of her. She seemed to understand as she leaned her head back, clutching the ground with her hands. Being as gentle as he could, Josh could feel the baby's feet and buttocks. "Your baby is breech. We need to turn it," he explained as a contraction seemed to hit her. Josh hoped these things could feel the empathy he felt for them in their situation. Knowing they didn't have the time needed for him to Google how to best help turn a breech baby the correct way, Josh recalled seeing a movie or a show once where the doctor pushed on the abdomen of the pregnant woman in breech to turn the baby, so he decided to try that. He could feel the baby shift a little with the pressure, so he began to push more, and she grunted as he applied the pressure and manipulated the baby to a correct orientation. He could see the baby crowning almost as soon as the head was in position. "I see it," Josh exclaimed excitedly. "You have to push with a contraction. Do you understand?" He could hear her grit her teeth and take in a large breath. His heart was racing. "Push," he said, and with a loud and long grunt, the baby Sasquatch slid into his arms. Josh could not believe what had just happened, and he became overwhelmed with the flood of emotions. He used his shoulders to wipe at the tears that came from nowhere. Realizing he had just left his sleeping gear at camp, Josh pulled a shirt from his bag and gently laid the baby on it. He checked to ensure the baby had a pulse and was breathing before gently wrapping her up and handing her over. "You did great, Mama. Congratulations on your daughter," he said as he stayed knelt beside her. "Are you okay?" he asked. He could see the joy in her eyes as she caressed the newborn. "Thank you," she replied. The baby made some cooing sounds unlike anything Josh had ever heard before. While they were somewhat animalistic in nature, they were soothing at the same time. Suddenly, Josh felt a huge hand on his shoulder. He had forgotten about the male during this ordeal. "We don't often trust you humans," the male said, and then continued. "We could sense you have a pure heart and do not take pleasure in killing animals. Now that our child is here, we will move back into the forest, leaving the humans and their animals alone. I only took what we needed to make sure that she was strong enough to get through the birth." He had a look of appreciation on his face as Josh had stood and turned to face him. The male was huge, over 7 feet tall, and he was 4 feet wide, with brown and black hair and gray leathery skin. Looking him square in the eyes, Josh said, "I have so many questions. I don't even know where to start." The thoughts raced through his mind. The giant male looked at the female and nodded, and with that gesture, she stood and handed their newborn to him. "Josh," she said, "I want to share with you and believe you will keep our secret." She reached her hands out and cradled Josh's face in her hands. Touching her thumbs to his forehead, Josh could feel her apply some slight pressure. He tensed for a moment, and his world went black. Josh woke up back at his camp. Looking at his watch, he had lost almost 36 hours. He checked his gear. Everything was accounted for. His head felt like it was in a vice. He reached for his water and he fished some Tylenol from his med kit. He popped 2 in his mouth and he washed them down with the water. Finishing the bottle, he began to recount his last memory. He recalled the female Sasquatch touching him, a flash of bright light, and then he wasn't quite sure how to explain this. It was as if she downloaded her memories into him. The last memory was of her telling Josh that they would see him again. Wondering what that meant, Josh set about gathering his stuff. He wasn't sure what he would tell the rancher when he got back, but it definitely would not be the truth. He had some time to mull it over as he packed his gear, and he realized he hadn't talked to Emily. He pulled his phone out and he sent her a message that he would be home in a few hours. And then he rucked up and he began his hike out. And that is the end of chapter 1 of the book Elusive. Man, I've never read anything like that. I have never even imagined a human helping a Sasquatch have a baby. I actually heard some guy on YouTube years ago talk about that he had been invited into a clan of Bigfoot, and there was a female Bigfoot birthing twins, and he knew their names, and he was talking with them with this mental telepathy thing, and he had developed a relationship with them. But after that, I never thought about it again. Now, Chris Kitchens has written a book about it. I wonder where this story is going. It would be worth buying this book. Click the link in the description below. Pick up this book. If you're a Kindle Unlimited member, it's nothing. You just check the book out. You can order a hard copy or buy the electronic version. But this chapter's really piqued my interest. I'm going to read this book. Okay, that's going to do it for this podcast. I appreciate you, Chris, for sending this, and the other two writers. I've enjoyed doing this podcast, and we will see you guys on the next one. Thanks.